There's something uniquely unsettling about being home alone. The silence feels heavier. The smallest sounds echo louder and shadows seem to linger just a little too long. Most of the time, we shrug it off. It's just the house settling or the wind outside. But sometimes, it isn't. Tonight I'll be sharing 3 terrifying true stories of people who were left home alone and discovered they weren't as alone as they thought. I was 16 the first time I was ever truly terrified to be home alone. It was a Friday night and my parents had gone out to dinner. I was left in charge of the house. Nothing unusual. I remember making popcorn, turning on Netflix, and curling up on the couch. Everything felt normal until the footsteps started. At first it was faint, just a creak above me, as if the wooden floorboards upstairs had shifted. I paused my show and listened. Silence. I told myself it was nothing. Houses make noises, right? But then it came again. A slow, deliberate step. Then another. The thing is, no one was supposed to be upstairs. I grabbed the remote and muted the TV. My heart started to beat faster and I stared up at the ceiling as if I could see through it. The steps were moving, from one end of the hall to the other, pacing. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but the sound was too clear. I checked the time, 9:14 p.m. My parents wouldn't be back for another hour. Every instinct in my body was telling me not to go upstairs, but I couldn't just sit there. I picked up the biggest kitchen knife I could find and slowly made my way up the stairs. Each step I took creaked beneath me, and when I reached the top, the hallway was dark. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. The bulb had burned out. My phone flashlight was the only thing keeping me from total darkness. I moved toward my room first, pushing the door open with the knife in my hand. Empty. Same with the bathroom. Same with my parents' room. The footsteps had stopped completely. The silence was deafening. I was just about to convince myself I had imagined it when I heard something that made my stomach drop. A closet door clicked shut at the end of the hallway. I froze. I knew I hadn't opened that door, and there was no draft strong enough to make it close on its own. I held my breath, stepped closer, and with a shaking hand, I reached for the knob. I yanked it open, my flashlight flooding the inside. Nothing, just coats and boxes. My pulse slowed just a little, but I still felt uneasy. I shut the closet and went back downstairs, locking myself in the living room until my parents got home. It wasn't until the next morning that everything made sense and got 100 times scarier. My mom asked why all the cereal boxes from the pantry were sitting on the counter. I hadn't touched them. We opened the fridge and noticed leftover food missing. Things were out of place. That's when we realized someone had been living in our house. Later, police found signs that a stranger had been hiding in the attic crawl space. They think he'd been there for days, maybe weeks, sneaking down only when we were gone or when we were asleep. And those footsteps I heard that night, they weren't in my head. He was up there, pacing while I sat alone in the house, completely unaware. I live on the 5th floor of a fairly old apartment building. It's not the kind of place that feels luxurious, but it's home. And being that high up, I always felt safe. After all, nobody can just walk up to your window when you're 5 stories above the ground. At least that's what I thought. It was late on a Thursday night, maybe close to midnight. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone with my headphones on, when I felt something. Not heard, felt. A faint vibration near the window like a tap. I took my headphones off and listened. Another tap, this time clearer. I glanced over at the window and froze. There were 3 distinct knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe a bird hit the glass. But these weren't random thuds. They were perfectly spaced. Deliberate. I got up, heart racing, and carefully pulled the curtain aside just an inch. What I saw made my stomach turn. A face, pale, pressed right against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over my chair. There was no balcony, no ledge, no fire escape outside that window. Just a sheer drop to the ground. The tapping started again, louder this time. Whoever, or whatever it was, they were smiling now. A twisted grin spreading across their face, as if they knew exactly how terrified I was. I didn't move for what felt like forever. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk security guard. When he answered, my voice was shaking as I told him someone was outside my 5th floor window. There was a long pause, and then he said, "Sir, that's impossible. There's no access to that side of the building. I swore I wasn't imagining it, begged him to send someone up. He said he'd come check my floor. The moment I hung up, I forced myself to look again. The face was gone. Just darkness outside. I kept staring, waiting for it to return, but it didn't. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I jumped so hard I nearly screamed, but it was just the security guard. I told him everything, showed him the window. He leaned out, shined a flashlight around, and of course, nothing. He left after reassuring me it was probably just a trick of the light. But I know what I saw. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed with every light on, watching that window until the sun came up. The next morning, when I finally got the courage to open the curtain, there was something on the glass, 3 smudged fingerprints. Oily human fingerprints, pressed right where the face had been. When I was in high school, I used to babysit to make some extra money. Most of the time it was easy. Kids went to bed, I did my homework, and that was it. But one job in particular has haunted me ever since. It was a Saturday evening, and I was hired to watch a 7-year-old girl named Emily. Her parents were going out to dinner and a movie, and they wouldn't be back until around midnight. I arrived around 6 p.m., and everything started out completely normal. We had pizza, played a board game. Then around 8:30, I tucked Emily into bed upstairs. She fell asleep quickly, and I went back down to the living room to watch TV. That's when the phone rang. It was the house's landline. Nobody really called it except telemarketers, but I answered anyway. At first, there was nothing but static. Then a man's voice whispered, "Have you checked on her lately?" I froze. I asked who it was, but the line went dead. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a prank call, maybe just bad reception. But about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. I picked it up, and this time the voice was more insistent. "She's not sleeping. She's watching you." My blood ran cold. I turned around instinctively, glancing at the darkened hallway behind me. I could still hear the faint sound of Emily's breathing monitor from upstairs, so I knew she was in her room. But I didn't feel alone. I called her parents right away. The mom answered, and I told her what happened. She assured me nobody should be calling their landline, and suggested it was probably just some creep dialing random numbers. I agreed, but I couldn't shake the unease. About half an hour later, it happened again. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to. This time the man laughed. A slow, deliberate chuckle that made my skin crawl. Then he said, "I'm inside the house." I slammed the phone down and immediately dialed 911. I explained what was happening, and the dispatcher told me to lock the doors and stay on the line until officers arrived. I rushed to the front door first. Locked. Back door. Locked. I was heading toward the garage entrance when I heard it thump, a sound from upstairs. I whispered Emily's name and crept toward the staircase. The breathing monitor was still going, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just white noise. My hands were shaking as I climbed the steps one by one. When I pushed Emily's door open, my heart nearly stopped. She was sitting upright in her bed, wide awake, staring at the closet. Her tiny voice broke the silence. "There's a man in there." I didn't even look. I grabbed her and pulled her into my arms, rushing downstairs as fast as I could. I locked us both in the bathroom, whispering that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. The police arrived minutes later, though it felt like hours. They swept the house from top to bottom, but found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of anyone hiding. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that maybe Emily had just had a nightmare, but the phone calls were real. The voice was real. Before I left that night, one of the officers quietly pulled me aside. He told me the phone calls had been traced. They were coming from inside the house. The family ended up changing their number and upgrading their security, but I never babysat for them again. To this day, I still can't sit in a dark house without thinking about that voice on the other end of the line.